Issues of proficiency and communicative competence and the desirability for native English speaker norms, which are shown by SLA, has led to this distinction between functional nativeness and genetic nativeness. So Kachru has presented this distinction, has made this distinction between functional nativeness and genetic nativeness. According to him, genetic nativeness refers to historical relationships of contact and convergence between languages that then gives rise to different language families, etc. So the connection between or among different languages on the basis of their historical relationships is genetic nativeness. And then Kachru makes this distinction in terms of functional nativeness. So according to him, sociolinguistic status and range and depth of use of English in a society refers to functional nativeness. For example, the range of use of English would mean the domains in which English is used, different domains in which English is used. If it is used in many domains and the number of domains keeps on increasing, the language is increasing its range. If it is being used by different levels of society, not only by a certain socioeconomic group, then the language is increasing its depth in that particular society or speech community. In such a speech community, the users of English are fully aware of the standard English. They are able to recognize the standard form of the language, and some of them, not all, some of them are quite proficient in the language, and their proficiency can be compared with the proficiency of native English speakers. Another idea which is quite close to the issue of proficiency is communicative competence. Communicative competence can be defined as the ability to use a language, a community's language, let's say, in appropriate ways to achieve goals and to operate in a society in an intended manner. Or what all this means is the ability to use language to achieve or to be able to perform certain functions. To use language, not only have the linguistic knowledge of the language, but being able to use language to communicate yourself to others. So, communicative competence refers to both tacit knowledge of the language, the knowledge of the language that you have, for example, of the linguistic system, etc., and also the ability to use it effectively. For example, if you only have the knowledge of the language system, etc., you know grammar very well, you know very good vocabulary, but you are not able to use it or not use it appropriately, then this use or this knowledge is of no use. So, along with this knowledge of the language, you should be able to use language in socially appropriate way. For example, if you go to Japan and you use English, you must be familiar with this Japanese culture of never entering a house with your shoes on. Similarly, if you use English in Pakistani context, it is important that you are aware of the deference that is shown in our culture to elders and seniors. So this kind of knowledge is extremely important for enabling people to use language appropriately and to claim that they have communicative competence of the language. So knowing and acting in accordance with the sociocultural knowledge. When you know the culture of the context in which the language is being used and you use language accordingly. You do not, for example, show disrespect or a lot of informality with elders if you are using language in, let's say, Pakistan and India. So you're completely familiar with the conventions of the use of the language, not only linguistic principles and rules and regulations, etc. So if the sociocultural knowledge plays a role in making sure that the communication is taking place successfully, then a native English speaker may not make a competent communicator in different contexts. So a person may know English very well, may be a native speaker, but may not be familiar with the socio-cultural realities of a particular context, and will therefore not be able to communicate appropriately in a given context. Therefore, a native speaker may not have communicative competence. So what we need to do to make sure that people develop this communicative competence when they are learning a language as a second language or an additional language, like people learn English all around the world as an additional language, to make sure that they do not only attain linguistic competence in the language but also communicative competence, so that they're able to actually use the language for communicative purposes. It is important that people are exposed to a number of varieties of English, that we should not limit ourselves to only native variety of English and publish in only native English variety, make films in only English, native English variety. It is important that people are exposed to different varieties of English so that they show this flexibility in their use of English. If that is practiced, then a native English speaker may not be taken aback when a speaker of English from the outer expanding circle uses English in his or her own peculiar way. For example, when an English speaker from outer or expanding circle says, you like cricket, isn't it? So when they make these individual kind of, or these kind of, use this kind of English which is peculiar to their own region, the native English speakers or users of other varieties of English are not taken aback, they are not at a loss, or they are not surprised. Another important step that can be taken is the inclusion of this notion of world Englishes in teacher education programs. So we need to raise awareness among English language teachers about this world Englishes paradigm, so that they also become tolerant to this idea of different varieties of English and make their students tolerant to this particular idea.